We good? Cool. Hello, everyone. Um, so I'll do a very brief introduction. My name is Jacob Goldwater. I'm a current student at Eretz. I'm a Northern Hemisphere student, which means I'm leaving the yeshiva on Thursday because our year is complete. So it's an absolute privilege to be sitting here at the end of my year giving this shir. This is the first proper shir I've ever given. So it's a real honor to be giving it as part of the Into the Future campaign, which is a very special opportunity. Um, to donate to a very cool yeshiva that has given so much to my year of learning. So this topic has been of huge interest to me, as I've grown up in a household where both my parents are doctors, and due to the nature of their work, they occasionally have to undertake responsibilities on Shabbat. So in that environment, kind of growing up, it always seemed like a no-brainer to me that obviously, when there's the opportunity to save someone's life, even if they're not Jewish, obviously you go ahead and you do that. But of course, halacha is never this easy. So this is going to be the topic of the show today. Now, just as a bit of context, the picture that you can see in front of you, I thought due to the title, Live or Let Die, it has to be something to do with James Bond. So I went onto the ChatGPT equivalent, the pictures, and I typed in, James Bond being Jewish, and that was like the fifth attempt to get something vaguely Jewish. So that's as close as I could get. But yeah, there we go. So let's begin the shit. I want to go back to May 2012. Now, in that year, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was the former Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel, as well as the longtime spiritual leader of the Haredi political party Shas. So he gave a shir to a group of students, and he said in that shir that the Torah does not permit saving a life of a non-Jew on Shabbat. Now, obviously, this is a very controversial statement, and this made the news the following morning on the Times of Israel's top stories. So this became kind of a big top story. This became a hit. How can someone so big, a hugely influential posek, say something so controversial? And it's really got me thinking, if someone so big is saying this, actually, if firstly, is what he said legitimate, then also, does that mean the doctors undertaking work on Shabbat are all committing Surim? And potentially, would I have to potentially tell my parents that what they're doing is wrong? So this really kind of got me thinking of this. This is obviously going to be answered in the next half an hour or so. So I want to start off by addressing the possible limitations of saving life on Shabbat. So we learn in the Gemara that there are three mitzvot that one may not transgress to save his life. They are avodah zarah, adultery, and murder. And the classic case is if someone has a gun to your head and says, commit one of these aveirot and I won't shoot you, then you cannot, and then you face the consequences, even if that means that you're going to die. But Shabbat, of course, was not one of the mitzvot mentioned above. However, we do see throughout history that people have valued Shabbat over life. And I want to start off by giving a source, if I can. Cool, perfect. From the book of Maccabees, which oh, thank you. Yeah, which is very interesting. So I want to focus on the last line here. I will say because of the lack of time and I've got quite a lot to get through, I won't read out every source in full. So yeah, bear with me on that. So the first source, I'm focusing on the last line involved. "Vayiplu aleihem b'yom Shabbat, v'yahargu kol asher b'ma'ara." So they rose up against them in battle on Shabbat and they slew them. V'yamutehem u'shehem v'tapam u'miknehem v'yu hamitim ka'elef nafesh, with their wives and children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 people. So this is interesting. Okay, to me, the logic that went through the minds of these individuals doesn't actually seem too far-fetched. Shabbat is one of the Ten Commandments. It's a very important principle of Judaism. So therefore, they may have decided actually performing performing malachot was out of the question on Shabbat. And the Gemara actually in Masechet Eruvin discusses a similar issue. It talks about a machloket if a group of non-Jews is coming to the future town, and there's a machloket over what one should and shouldn't do. So it's a big discussion, but this is kind of an interesting example that I thought of that kind of frames this in a historical perspective. The Talmud is full of discussions relating to how we interact with non-Jews around us. And our main Talmudic source, which is the Talmud Bavli, was written in exile, surrounded by other nations. So it's no surprise at all that we see loads of discussions about interactions with non-Jews. Before we get to the Gemara, let's look at a fascinating Mishnah from Masechet Yoma. The many poskim use as the basis of their arguments when it comes to the dilemma of saving non-Jews on Shabbat. So we've got a very, very interesting Mishnah here. Misha nafla alav mapolet safek husham safek ein husham. So if an avalanche fell on someone and it is doubtful whether he is there or not, and then we read Safek Chai, Safek Mate, whether he is alive or dead. The key line here, Safek Nachui, Safek Israel, whether he is not a Jew or a Jew. Mefakim alav et haga'al, masa'uhu chai, mefachan alav ve'im mate yanichuhu. So we read that they remove the debris from above him, even on Shabbat. If they find him alive, they remove the debris, but if dead, they should leave him there until Shabbat is over. So this is very interesting. The Mishnah is talking about a case of Safek when there is doubt. Now, obviously, this is a scenario where we're going to be focusing on the Safek Nachu Safek Israel, the one talking about whether he is a Jew or not a Jew. Now, one could argue that this wouldn't even be in the Mishnah if we use straight away we could save non-Jews. So straight away it's causing doubt and saying actually at the very least we could argue that we're unsure whether we can save non-Jews, and it's a big question. And some poskim actually stretched to the conclusion that there's no doubt that if there's a non-Jew there, you may not save him. In the same way that we read that if he's not there, we don't take the rubble off, and if he's dead, we don't take the rubble off. So too, if he's a non-Jew, we don't take the rubble off. But that's kind of jumping to a conclusion that many poskim do. But another interesting feature of this Mishnah that people often use to justify their conclusion is they translate the Mishnah as whether he is there or not, whether he is alive or not, whether he is a Jew or not. Now, those who use the translation would say that the first case is when we definitely would save them, and the second case is when we definitely wouldn't save them. For example, if he's there, we definitely would. If he isn't there, we definitely wouldn't take the rubble off. So this could have been a fair argument. However, if we look at the Mishnah, this is not actually what the Mishnah says when it comes to talking about the Jew and the non-Jew, because we read that the non-Jew is stated before the Jew in the Mishnah. We read Safek Nachri Safek Israel, which is interesting. So this struck me as rather peculiar because maybe this is a simple mistranslation. For example, the translation I've got here that I took from a Sefer, this is not my translation, actually does this. It says a Jew before a non-Jew. So this is something very interesting. Now, my Rav very kindly put me in touch, Rav Wardy Friedman, my Rav, put me in touch with a world-renowned Mishnah expert, Rav Avraham Wolfish from the Gush, and I sent him an email, and he actually gave me a very detailed answer about what could be going on here, and he was very helpful. So he actually said that there are many stylistic features that the Mishnah uses, and here we could be seeing a classic style of the shorter word preceding the longer word. So here we see the word sham, before Ein or Sham, and we see Nachri before Yisrael, the shorter word before the longer word. And then the one in the middle, Safek Chai, Safek Mate, they're the same length words, so obviously it doesn't really make a difference. So Rabbi Wolfish offered an explanation that helps me really try to kind of decipher the meaning behind the order here. But I was kind of still less confused, but the conclusion we can kind of draw is actually it's unclear if we can save a non-Jew. That is the conclusion that I got from this Mishnah at this point. Now Rambam seems to codify this Mishnah, Mishnah Torah, which was written in the late 12th century. So in Hilchot Shabbat, lovely. In Hilchot Shabbat, we read this very interesting paragraph, focusing on the last line here. Mefachim alav shema zeh sheperosh hayag Yisrael v'anisharim of day kochavim imazalot. We read perhaps the person who departed as a Jew and all those who remained were Gentiles. So this is a very similar case, and focusing on the last line here, which is interesting. It's saying that actually, if we knew it was a Jew, we have to save them because we have to save them just in case on the tiny chance they could be a Jew. So here, like the Mishnah, there is Safek whether it's a Jew or not a Jew, but it seems to be more clear in this one that actually we can reach the conclusion that if we know they're all not Jews, we don't save them. But once again, there is still doubt, and there are different ways to interpret. But that is the main interpretation that most people bring down when it comes to this discussion. And therefore, that many people argue that you do not have the ability to save non-Jews on Shabbat if it means performing a melacha. There is another interesting Rambam that I want to talk about, and this will kind of move on to the next part of the shir. This will lead nicely on to the next part. So the Rambam opens Hilchot Shabbat Perek Bet with a very interesting phrase. He says, Shabbat sakanat nefashot kishar kol mitzvot. The laws of Shabbat are suspended in the face of dangers to life, as are the obligations of other mitzvot. Okay, very, very interesting. Because by opening with these words, Rambam is very quickly establishing the principle of the importance of life. He's saying actually the melachot and other halachot the Rambam will discuss in the Hilchot Shabbat are prohibited on Shabbat, but in a case where they must be broken to save a life, the life takes precedence, which is interesting. I will pick up on the fact that he uses the word dechuya, not twitra, meaning permitted. And this goes to show that actually we only push aside halachot when absolutely necessary. And this then kind of raises the very interesting question: what does that mean, necessary? Does it apply to certain people, certain situations, certain malachot? So obviously questions that we'll try and answer in the next 20 minutes. But it's very interesting, this kind of this terminology that he uses. So I'd now like to move on to Masechet Yoma, the Gemara, which tries to kind of present proofs and answer the question of, can we save a life on Shabbat? And there are a total of 7 proofs given in this Gemara, which is crazy. I remember Rav Grummet, one of my teachers at Eretz Tzvi, incredible teacher. He always used to say, if there's more than one proof or more than one reason, they're all bad. Which is quite funny. Not necessarily the case, but the point is they all disagree with each other. So there are loads of different ways to look at this Gemara. So I'm going to focus on the first part here, so the first 5 lines, and I'm just going to summarize. So the first proof we bring is brought by Rabbi Elazar, who talks about the matter of Brit Milah, and he argues that just as one organ in the body can be rectified on Shabbat, which is one mitzvah, Kol v'chomer, the whole body can be rectified and saved if the whole body is involved in mitzvah, which is interesting. Not the strongest Kol v'chomer, but there's the first proof. The second proof is brought by Rabbi Yossi, and he focuses on the pasuk in Shemot, where he says, but keep my Shabbatot. And the word but is the key part here. He's saying, but indicates that actually most circumstances we have to keep Shabbat, but there may be certain circumstances where we can desecrate it, particularly in the context of saving life, because that is the topic of this sugya. The next proof is brought by Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, who says that the pasuk, it is sacred to you, implies that Shabbat is given to us in our hands, and we are not to die on account of it. And finally, this proof brought by Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, he brings the pasuk, and the children of Israel shall keep Shabbat. And he's saying that actually we desecrate one Shabbat, so the children of Israel, we can continue to keep many Shabbatot in the future, which is a lovely idea. But there is another proof brought by Rabbi Ishmael, and this one is slightly different in one particular aspect. We read so this is the next bit, the following 3 lines. Now Rabbi Ishmael Vamar. So here, Rabbi Ishmael says that in a situation where a robber breaks into a house and your life is in danger, you can actually kill the thief. Kol v'chomer, you can break Shabbat to save your life. And he seems to be saying that murder is significantly worse than breaking Shabbat, and therefore breaking Shabbat is not as problematic as killing in this case. Now, this is particularly interesting, but this is the first and only proof that I saw that doesn't obviously kind of apply only to Jews. The proofs beforehand were based on the obligation of Brit Milah or Shabbat or other mitzvot, and therefore it's clear that actually this one is slightly less clear about whether it applies to Jews or not necessarily to Jews, which is interesting. Possibly the first small hint that actually there may be some arguments out there which say that we can save non-Jews on Shabbat. However, the sugya does end with Rava disputing all of these proofs, explaining that none of these are reliable proofs to bring in a case where there is uncertainty whether he will die or not without your intervention. And he says there's only one proof that actually does this successfully, and this is the proof brought by Shmuel, and Shmuel in the Gemara brings this pasuk right at the bottom from Vayikra. Ushmatem es chukotai bet mishpatai asher yaseotam ha'adam v'chai bahem ani Hashem. Beautiful pasuk. This is probably one that I learned in school many years ago. It's beautiful. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which human beings shall I live. I am Hashem. And we learn the beautiful line here that we must live by the mitzvot and not die by the mitzvot. And since every law in the Torah is intended to uphold life, one should not observe a law when it leads to death. So the conclusion drawn by the Rishonim from here and the rabbis is that actually every law in the Torah, except the 3 that we said before, the Avodah Zarah, the adultery, and the murder, even if there is uncertainty whether he will die without intervention, we should break Shabbat to save them. So this is a very important point for kind of just understanding Pikuach Nefesh and where it fits in with Shabbos. Now let's apply it to the case of non-Jews. So interactions with different types of non-Jews. As I said before, there are loads of different discussions in the Gemara because understandably they were kind of living in society where non-Jews were there. So obviously there were a lot of interactions. So it's very important to kind of have cases concerning different people from different cultures. So we read this Mishnah, which is at the beginning of a sugya, all about interacting with different types of non-Jews for the purpose of giving birth and breastfeeding. And I'm going to read the English because I need to hurry up a bit. So focusing on the first line here, a Jewish woman may not deliver the child of a gentlewoman because in doing so, she is delivering a child who will engage in idol worship. So this sparks a question, or many questions, regarding how we treat different types of non-Jews. Because now do we differentiate between people who worship idols and people who maybe don't worship a god at all. And in this Mishnah, we're saying that it's problematic to bring an idol worshipper into the world because we're allowing them to live a life disgracing Hashem's name and living a life of avodah zarah. And therefore, we can possibly apply this argument as well to our discussion here and say that if we save the life of someone who performs avodah zarah, we are allowing them to continue a life filled with disgracing Hashem's name. So this is interesting. However, this is fascinating. I discovered during my learning and research that actually this is a particularly weak argument because the Mishnah didn't actually have these words originally, about an idol worshipper, but instead it had the word nachrit, which is kind of possibly a more general term for a non-Jew. So I've got a picture here. This is the Kaufman manuscript written in the 10th century. And you can see I've kind of put a red circle around the word nachrit so you can see. And this is fascinating. You can see there's a different terminology, and there's a small tangent. We know this is probably because in the 16th century, following the invention of the printing press, the Talmud was banned by the Pope, and all printed editions, including the Vilna edition Shas, which is what we use today, were censored. And therefore, I think it's just interesting to note at this point that all the Makorot that we use today for various different reasons, actually, we need to be careful to work out what was the original intention behind the meaning. What should we understand from this? And not necessarily just look at the Peshat. So this is very interesting to observe. But so moving on, there is another interesting source from the Ramban who presents the other perspective here. So this top source here, and I'll quickly summarize. In this source, he addresses the idea that one may desecrate Shabbat to save a get or shav. And this is someone who follows the 7 Noahide laws, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. Therefore, not someone who falls into the category stated in the Gemara, because the first of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach is don't perform avodah zarah. So therefore, it's not someone who kind of fits into what we were talking about before. We could also look back at the pasuk in Vayikra, talking about you should live by your mitzvah and not die by the mitzvah, and say that actually, just as we live by our 630 mitzvot, they should live by their 7 mitzvot, and they shouldn't die by their 7 mitzvot. We could also possibly apply the logic there to here as well, talking about the mitzvot that these people, a ger toshav, will need to follow. So far, the Ramban is making the first clear case that we should save non-Jews on Shabbat, despite only referring to a specific category. Now, the Me'eria, 14th century Talmud Chacham, aligns with the Ramban's position. And we read here that he says, any Noahide that has accepted upon himself the 7 Noahide laws as one of the righteous people of the world, and it's included in the category of religious people and has a share in the world to come. It's interesting that he labels them as religious people, okay? So showing strongly that he believed actually they should be treated as religious people in most halachot. And there is actually another interesting quote from the Meiri that I didn't bring here, but he talks about the fact that actually even non-Jews who are not Gerei Toshav, but people who don't perform Avodah Zarah, he said that actually these also apply in this case, and we should be able to save them. However, I will just say at this point, there are different commentaries talking about the fact that actually he may have written this under duress, or perhaps maybe the manuscript was tampered with after he passed away. So we don't know that this is not something that we talk about very much because we're not 100% sure this is kind of what was written by his hand. But our discussions until now are focused on what Pekuach Nefesh means in our relationship with different nations around us. So now I want to bring in another important factor. This is probably the most important factor we'll discuss in this share. And this is a factor that has become more prevalent in our society kind of as we've gone on. And there have kind of been peaks and troughs of when this has been important. So let's look at this Gemara here, where we will look at this issue. So reading the first line, I'll read in English. Rav Yosef thought to say, delivering the child of a Gentile woman on Shabbat in exchange for payment is permitted due to enmity. Okay. So the issue that is a hugely significant factor in the rest of this share is Ava, which means enmity. So this is the issue that could cause tensions between us and fellow nations. And take a minute to think, what does this actually mean? If we think about the previous discussion that we've had so far, we seem to favor certain nations over others, as these nations follow the commandments given to them. In society, just take a minute to think, how would it look if we jump into action to save Ger Toshav and not when actually someone who performs Avodah Zarah is there and really needs help, and we turn a blind eye and pretend we don't see them, or just kind of say no, we're not treating them. So this is where the problem of Ava comes in, and the Khatam Sofer actually points out throughout history we've seen tensions bubble up between the Jews and society around them. And this led to pogroms and exile from particular countries. And this is a huge risk to the Jewish nation. So this concept of Eva plays a huge role in determining whether we can, or even whether we have an obligation to save a non-Jew protect the Jewish nation. Yeah, it's very interesting. So I want to move on now to some more contemporary sources, so we can understand how we interpret this idea today. So first, looking at the Mishnah Berurah. So what does the Chafetz Chaim say? So he says, even if we assume it is permitted to desecrate Shabbat by transgressing a rabbinical prohibition in order to prevent animosity between non-Jews and Jews, even though this is also not certain, that's interesting in the brackets there, it is definitely forbidden, according to all authorities, to transgress a Torah prohibition for this reason. These doctors are therefore fully guilty of Shabbat desecration, willful transgression. May heaven preserve us. Wow. Okay. The way he ends that is, quite harsh in my opinion. So that he's clearly kind of got a very strong opinion here. So what's he trying to say? So this is interesting for two reasons, I think, what the Mishnah Berurah says here, because the Chafetz Chaim first is emphasizing that we can't use this idea of Eva as a definite proof. There is doubt over whether it's valid, and we must be careful not to jump to conclusions based on this factor. But more importantly, of our discussion now, the Chafetz Chaim is distinguishing between Rabbanan and Doraita, which is mitzvah ruled by the rabbis and mitzvah ruled from the Torah, directly from the Torah. Because he's saying that we can't justify doing malachot stated directly in the Torah. The punishment is much worse, and actually we have to avoid breaking the Doraita mitzvot at all times. And for example, it's preferable to simply dispense medication or even put a bandage on if the doctor needs to offer help, rather than offering more advanced treatment that could break more severe malachot. Now, it's interesting to note, I will just add a bit of context. Mishnah Berurah began publication in the 1880s, so it's a moderately recent posek. And therefore, it's interesting to see how he kind of presents this problem of enmity and addresses it by still placing quite heavy limitations. And possibly I would argue that this halacha may not be so well respected today by non-Jews and governments. And I'm in good company with this position, as Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the most influential poskim of the 20th century, comments on this passage from the Mishnah Berurah, which is on the screen now. So I'm going to focus on the parts I've highlighted in bold. The halachic principle of Eva, which, as we discussed with enmity, is not based solely on the desire for good human relations within a community. There is a far greater concern that a breakdown of human relations will actually lead to the killing of Jews. Thus, not treating a non-Jew on the Shabbat on Shabbat may very well endanger the lives of other Jews. This is why I find it so difficult to understand the position of the Chafetz Chaim. Now, he directly says the Chafetz Chaim in this quote here, so he has very strong opinions. Actually, he really does not agree with the Chafetz Chaim, which is interesting. And this is a huge ruling by Rav Moshe Feinstein, in my opinion, because he is saying no matter who it is, whether it's somebody who worships idols or not, whether it's kind of our neighbor next door, of a certain religion, or someone, an atheist down the road who doesn't believe in any God, that actually, if we don't treat them, this could have very bad consequences for the Jewish nation. And we've seen countless occasions of Jews in a lot of trouble, and we need to kind of avoid getting ourselves into that position again. I will add that Rav Moshe Feinstein clarifies that the obligation to save all humans, this is actually quite interesting, applies even when there is no one there watching you. Because you might think that actually, if there's no visible risk of enmity, that no one's going to know, then actually maybe this doesn't apply. But he's saying, actually, there's always a possibility people know, and you have to avoid getting yourself into trouble. And therefore, in this case, Rav Moshe makes very clear that you should always apply this halacha. However, now, this is something that I'll now emphasize quite a lot. He does say very clearly at the end that Jews must do everything they can to avoid getting themselves in this position at all, which means changing their work schedule, swapping with non-Jews, using annual leave on Shabbat to make sure they don't put themselves in this position. However, if they are in this position due to certain factors, like they can't swap, or they're an incredible specialist in a certain area of medicine, and like they're one of a kind, then actually it is necessary to work, and there are certain limitations. So I want to focus on kind of one more idea in the last few minutes or so, and this is a beautiful idea that we see for the first time in Mishlei from this pasuk at the top. Now we actually say this in Eretz Tzvi every Monday and Thursday morning during Hagbah. It's beautiful, beautiful pasuk. So it's talking about the values of the Torah and what the Torah can bring to this world. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its pathways are peace. This is beautiful. In the words of Rav Steinsaltz, he says, peace and pleasantness are the Torah's foundational principles and its goals, according to which it operates. So we should incorporate Darchei Shalom into every action that we do, and make sure that we kind of remember that there are opportunities for Kiddush Hashem all the time whenever we interact with others. And the Rambam actually codifies this halacha here, and he says. He quotes Darchei Shalom directly. We provide sustenance and clothing for the poor of the Gentiles together with the poor of the Jewish people as an expression of the ways of peace, which is Darchei Shalom. So although this doesn't kind of directly apply to our discussion, it's important to note that here he's really emphasizing the importance of Darchei Shalom and how it really applies to our lives. Now, by no means am I saying that we should go out of our way to commit Isurim and break 39 Malachot because of Darchei Shalom, but instead, I personally think that we should be thinking to ourselves, not that we should help them only because otherwise they might hold a grudge against us, but instead we should embrace these kind of opportunities with the attitude of we are directly kind of forging relationships between different cultures and religions, which is extremely important in our society today. And remember, Darchei Shalom is very, very important. However, it is very important to note that obviously enmity is the main concern, and Darchei Shalom shouldn't be used necessarily to kind of just jump at an opportunity on Shabbat to save someone. And obviously there are many factors to consider. Now, I want to finish off by turning to Rabbi Unterman, who was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel in the 60s and 70s. And he was very vocal when it came to this topic, because if I look at the context at the time, we had many Arab neighbors who were starting to use our facilities. For example, Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, which is literally just down the road from where I'm sitting right now. And there were Jews working on Shabbat who were often treating Arab patients. So therefore, this discussion became very, very relevant. And he wrote this interesting passage here, and I'll focus once again on the bold here. There is therefore a need to interpret the true meaning of the term peaceful ways, Darchei Shalom, which is not in terms of the degree of Hasidicism, nor as a means of protecting ourselves, but stems from the very morality of the Holy Torah. Everything that we do for the sake of peaceful ways should have an attitude of devotion to the Lord, at least the lifestyles of Judaism as established by the sages of the Torah, as of their desire to cultivate peace and friendship between people. Our sages found it necessary to establish preventative regulations and to remove whispers of jealousy and hatred. Now, this is very interesting. So he's saying it's all about the values of the Torah, that this is what the Torah kind of would want. We need to live by the Torah, and therefore we need to remember these values. And he brings up both Darchei Shalom and Eva, these two important principles that we've kind of discussed in the last 10 minutes or so. Therefore, he's saying that we do kind of have an obligation to provide treatment and assistance and not use the medical field. So I've literally got 2 minutes left, so I'll very quickly kind of summarize what we've discussed. So we started off by discussing that actually throughout history, some people have said, or some people have believed that Shabbat trumps life, and Shabbat is more important than life. But actually, we discussed that actually there are proofs in the Gemara that show that saving life is more important than Shabbat, which is interesting. And then we kind of moved on to how this applies to non-Jews and finished off by talking about the issues of Eva and Darchei Shalom. And Rav Unterman and Rav Moshe summarize the most popular answer to the question that we use today. It is crucial to remember our role in society, especially in Chutz La'aretz, and the importance of being a Kiddush Hashem. When necessary, we must step outside our comfort zone and do what is right. However, both poskim emphasize multiple times that Jews must do everything they can to make sure they swap out of work, and they don't work on Shabbat if they can help it. For example, if they can take annual leave or swap with non-Jews. And also, going back to the Mishnah Brura, many people poskim by him today and talk about actually we should avoid breaking Doraita mitzvot, and actually D'Rabbanan mitzvot slightly more lenient, and therefore we should prioritize certain actions in a hospital and maybe ask nurses or other fellow doctors to do certain things which could be more problematic. Now, I very quickly want to finish off by turning to this. I've pulled this from the Israeli Medical Association, specifically from the Oath of a Hebrew Physician, which applies to kind of all doctors, and it's specifically written for Jewish doctors in Israel. You will aid the sick irrespective of whether they're converts or Gentiles or citizens, whether they are ignominious or respected. Act to serve the health and welfare of the public and to alleviate the distress of the people. So whilst doctors should take steps to always avoid work on Shabbat, contemporary poskim are in agreement that the above principle is the one which doctors must follow, and therefore there are ways round in halacha to ensure that help can be provided to non-Jews when needed. That is my half an hour up. Thank you very, very much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to give my first share in this setting. And I will now log off and pass on to Rob Mordy.